How did someone who was so poor he had to sell his own blood to get through college manage to become a multi-billionaire? Well, not without a lot of hard work, insane amounts of persistence, Bill Gates' dad, and pretty much everyone he ever knew telling him he was crazy. Wait, Bill Gates' dad? We'll get to that, don't worry. But first, meet Howard Schultz, the man behind the empire we know today as Starbucks. This is the story of how Schultz took a small coffee business in Seattle and turned it into a billion-dollar company, revolutionizing the coffee industry as we know it, and running into, well, a few controversies along the way. But before we get to all that, we have to back it up a bit, because this story doesn't start with Schultz. This story starts with a college kid named Gordon Boker traveling through Rome on his summer holidays, trying to find himself. Well, while we're not sure if Boker ever did manage to find himself, we do know that he managed to find something else on his trip: coffee. In a small cafe in Rome, Boker had his first ever sip of cappuccino, and the world was never the same since. As they say, one small sip for man, one giant leap for mankind. Boker couldn't believe it. How come all the coffee back home tasted like crap? As soon as he was back in Seattle, he told his two friends, Gerald Baldwin and Zev Siegel, about his life-changing experience, and they decided to set up Starbucks. But here's the thing, when you think of Starbucks, you might think of comfy sofas and misspelled names, but the first ever Starbucks store was, well, a little different from what we have today. Because the Starbucks of 1971 didn't sell coffee. You couldn't walk in and order an iced mocha frappuccino or a venti latte with caramel syrup. Oh no, the Starbucks of 1971 sold coffee beans and brewing equipment. Their concept was simple: sell high-quality coffee beans and educate consumers about it. And for nearly a decade, that's exactly what they did. That was, however, until Howard Schultz got wind of the whole thing. But we'll get to that later. So where does the name Starbucks come from anyway? Well, it was inspired by the first mate in Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick, because the founders were big fans of the sea and adventure, or whatever. And hey, it's an easy way to come across as a sophisticated intellectual. Just name your business after some dude in a classic novel. Anyway, business was good, and by the 1980s, Starbucks had expanded to 4 stores in Seattle. And this is when our buddy Schultz comes into the picture. You see, Howard Schultz was no stranger to hard work. Born in Brooklyn, he grew up super poor. That explains the selling his blood thing. After putting himself through college, he climbed his way up through various sales jobs until he found himself working for a housewares company. The same housewares company that supplied brewing equipment to none other than Starbucks. Turns out he's so impressed by the company's commitment to quality that he had a vision. During a dream, he imagines himself working at Starbucks and making big fat piles of cash. Okay, that didn't really happen, but he sees the potential in Starbucks' vision, and call it intuition, call it madness, but Schultz became obsessed with Starbucks. He wrote to these guys for a year asking them to let him join the team. Eventually, Schultz convinced them, or wore them down. Either way, he was in. But he would still have a lot more convincing to do. You see, Schultz had also taken a trip to Italy, and on his trip, he also had a life-changing coffee-related experience, except not with the product, but with the experience. He was amazed by the local coffee culture and noticed a sense of community where the baristas would know their customers by name. People would go to their local cafe every day to enjoy their coffee and relax, chat, or even conduct business. That's when he realizes he could bring this concept to the US. Instead of just being a coffee bean retailer, why not turn it into a coffee house that's known for its social atmosphere? This may not sound groundbreaking to you now, but apparently in 1983, it was. But here's where Schultz's second big obstacle comes in. While he tried to convince his partners of his crazy vision of having a nice time with people while drinking coffee, Baldwin and Boker were like, nope, no way, we don't want to serve people coffee, that's weird. So in 1985, Schultz realized his persistence wasn't going to pay off this time, and he left Starbucks to start his own coffee shop, Il Giornale. Yes, that's how you pronounce it. Don't fight me on this. Anyway, for the next 2 years, he did pretty well, except he was obsessed with Starbucks, remember? So when the opportunity came up to buy it in 1987, he knew he was going all in. And this is where Bill Gates Sr. comes into the picture. You see, the original owners wanted $3.8 million. Schultz had nada. So what did he do? He knocked down every investor's door in town and asked them to invest. He's persistent, remember? Now, here's where things almost went south. Schultz was so convincing in one of his pitches that the investor tried to buy Starbucks himself and cut Schultz out of the deal. Devastated and depressed, Schultz talks about this to one of his friends. Now his friend was like, you need to come in and meet this partner in my company. So Schultz was like, okay. And it turned out the partner was none other than Bill Gates Sr. Apparently, Gates took pity on young Schultz's hopes and dreams and his borderline psychotic obsession with Starbucks, and he convinced the other investor not to cut him out. How exactly did he do this, you ask? Well, he appealed to the man's morality. Yep, he gave him a good old talking down to and basically told him it wouldn't be nice to do that to Howard. And amazingly, the investor backed down. No wonder Bill Gates went on to do so much. With a supportive dad like that? So in 1987, Howard Schultz finally became the big boss. He rebranded the stores to reflect the whole coffeehouse concept. And 12 years after its first store, Starbucks was finally serving coffee. His vision was clear. Starbucks would be the third place between home and work, a place where people could hang out, meet friends, and of course, enjoy a great cup of coffee. He set up a welcoming atmosphere and started offering a variety of coffee drinks, which of course eventually led to selling weird-ass drinks like pumpkin spice latte or caramel camel milk broccoli explosion, or whatever it is they're serving these days. Anyway, under Schultz's leadership, Starbucks grew rapidly. At its peak, Starbucks was opening 7 new stores every single day. In fact, it was growing so fast that Schultz stepped down from his role as CEO to devote his undivided attention to expansion. In 1996, Starbucks stores started popping up in Asia, then Europe, and the Middle East, followed by Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2002, Starbucks introduced in-store Wi-Fi, but people had to pay for it because, well, it's 2002, and Rickrolling wasn't even a thing yet. But it's certainly not a happily ever after just yet, so don't get too excited. You see, in 2008, there was this little thing called the global financial crisis. And despite their world-dominant impressive growth, Starbucks was not immune. Turns out, when there's a financial crisis, people don't like to spend money on overpriced fancy drinks. And it wasn't just that either. Starbucks had expanded so fast that they were becoming oversaturated in some areas and struggled to maintain the high standards of quality and customer service that had made them so successful in the first place. Result? Starbucks stock plummeted by 50%. It was time for some drastic measures. It was time to bring back Schultz. So, in 2008, Schultz was like, hold my beer, and made a dramatic return as CEO and immediately started revamping the company's strategy. His first move was to close over 600 underperforming stores and focus on getting back to basics. He removed all automatic espresso machines and brought back in-house grinding, filling cafes with that inviting smell of fresh coffee. Then, he closed every single Starbucks store in the US for a training day, despite it costing them $7 million. $7 million at the peak of the financial crisis. But weirdly enough, it was worth it. Retraining the staff helped them deliver a better customer experience, and customer satisfaction levels rose. It even helped their image, as it showed to the world that they were focusing again on quality. Schultz also introduced the Starbucks Rewards program, which encouraged even more customer loyalty. And then, he set his sights beyond coffee. He started providing free Wi-Fi. This may not sound groundbreaking now, but this turned Starbucks into a place where you could stay for hours and even work from. It changed how people thought about their workspaces. Sure, some people just bought one Americano and stayed the whole day without buying anything else, but most ordered every hour or so and basically made Starbucks their second home. With this same line of thinking, Starbucks expanded its food options with new menu items like breakfast sandwiches and even salads for the most hardcore people. In 2014, they started opening their Reserve rotisseries, which are extra-large locations made to showcase Starbucks' expertise in coffee making. They feature on-site coffee roasting and interactive brewing methods. They're basically a theme park for coffee nerds. They also developed the Starbucks app so that customers could order and pay for their drinks ahead of time. Check out our stories to find out how this changed everything for Starbucks. With these weird strategies, Starbucks not only recovered, but started to thrive. By 2017, the company had over 25,000 stores worldwide and was more profitable than ever. However, Starbucks wasn't immune to controversy. Around this time, the company came under fire for its tax practices in Europe, and Schultz himself became a polarizing figure due to his outspoken political views. Schultz became determined to prevent Starbucks employees from unionizing, violating labor laws, and bringing himself under major public scrutiny in the process. I mean, when a billionaire tries to stop his workers from unionizing, it's bound to ruffle more than a few feathers. In 2018, he stepped down as CEO again, this time handing the role to Kevin Johnson. Under Johnson's leadership, Starbucks faced new challenges. The rise of the gig economy and changing consumer preferences meant that Starbucks had to constantly innovate to stay relevant. Johnson introduced new store formats, such as Starbucks pickup stores and the Starbucks Now concept in China, designed for mobile orders that integrate digital ordering with delivery services. Johnson also prioritized sustainability. Starbucks committed to reducing its environmental footprint, setting ambitious goals to reduce waste, water usage, and carbon emissions. The company also began to phase out plastic straws, which brought them a lot of positive media attention and a lot of soggy straws. But despite these efforts, the company still continued to face some criticism. It didn't exactly help that in 2018, 2 black men were arrested for sitting in the store without ordering. Slight overreaction, don't you think? Needless to say, this sparked mass outrage. Starbucks responded by closing all US stores for a day to conduct racial bias training, a move that won them some praise, but not enough to overhaul their whole image. All in all, the 2010s were pretty rocky for Starbucks and for Howard Schultz himself. Well, the guy's a billionaire, so I'm not sure things are ever truly rocky for him. But he faced some criticism. That being said, the fact remains that Starbucks today is a global powerhouse with over 30,000 stores in 80 countries, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. When you consider that this all started with one underprivileged guy who had a strange obsession with a coffee store, it really shows what you can achieve with determination, persistence, and a helping hand from Bill Gates' dad.